The challenge with this idea of leverage points is, of course, identifying such places where small changes can have enormous effects for the entire system. In this lecture, we focus on a list of increasingly powerful leverage points formulated by Meadows in what sounded to have been a state of flow. Meadows argues that the lowest level of leverage point effectiveness is found in changing parameters, such as the level of attacks. Later, she mentions that replacing leaders may be an exception to this low effectiveness ranking. Similarly, other parameters with nonlinear effects, such as the discount rate, could arguably be considered higher effectiveness leverage points. The next level on this leverage point effectiveness ladder are the sizes of buffers and stabilizing stocks. Changes to the size of buffers can buy you time, but as long as there are no other changes in the system, this is all it does. I had some difficulties providing an example of this leverage point, but think that the case of carbon capture through volcanic olivine rocks serves to increase the carbon budget buffer. I first read about olivine in the inspiring book by Hawken that gives a comprehensive review of available mitigation technologies and strategies. With changes to the structure of material stocks and flows, we have now entered the top 10 of most effective leverage points to intervene in a system. Much of the transition to cleaner modes of production falls under this header. One particularly interesting example concerns the interactions between such flows and stocks. Consider the problem of traffic congestions in cities. Here, a change in the structure of the flow can be beneficial, since the Downs-Thomson paradox formulated that equilibrium speed of private transportation is determined by door-to-door traveling time of equivalent trips with public transport. As a result, many cities have addressed this congestion problem by making some lanes exclusive to public transport. I did not include an example of delays, as Meadows notes that many relevant delays are difficult to influence. We find leverage points that influence the strength of balancing feedback loops as the 8th most effective. The examples provided by Meadows include preventative medicine, protection of whistleblowers, and integrated pest management. This integrated pest management corrects against the reinforcing monoculture feedback loop that we discussed in the second lecture, where monocultures create environments favorable to the pests that specialize in eating the crop in question. Intercropping is likely to be an important part of such integrated pest management to encourage natural predators of crop pests. Including legumes like peas into the crop mix will give a balancing force to the monoculture feedback loop by reducing the dependency on fertilizers due to nitrogen fixing properties. Fourier and colleagues argue that our neglect of peace power is compromising both sustainable agriculture and human health. They write, a second green revolution is required to ensure food and nutritional security in the face of global climate change. Grain legumes provide an unparalleled solution to this problem because of their inherent capacity for symbiotic atmospheric nitrogen fixation, which provides economically sustainable advantages for farming. In addition, a legume-rich diet has health benefits for humans and livestock alike. Peas also play an important role in plant-based alternatives to meat and fish. I'm not sure how many of you would be able to distinguish a pea-based Beyond Burger from a beef patty. And similarly, I find that the guilt-free Funa tastes near identical to canned tuna. As a last, low-budget culinary tip, some beans are also excellent as sprouts. In my opinion, sprouting black-eyed beans gives a close substitute to cashew nuts when stir-fried. Meadows argues that the influence over positive feedback loops provide more powerful leverage points than those that influence negative feedback loops. She gives high-quality public education and an inheritance tax as examples of leverage points that slow down the successful to the successful loops. Similarly, food forests aim to stop the monoculture feedback loop of increased dependency on fertilizer and pesticide use by harnessing natural balancing feedback loops instead. The food forest concept promises a low-maintenance form of agroforestry by mixing a variety of perennial plants in 7 different layers. Intercropping and agroforestry techniques date back to prehistoric times in tropical areas. Robert Hart has been credited with translating these principles for forest gardening to temperate climates. I spent most of the pandemic in Mexico because visa issues made it impossible for my wife to visit the Netherlands. A couple of months into the pandemic, we decided to buy a small piece of land where my wife and I tried to apply this forest gardening. For the canopy layer, we have planted an avocado tree and a guava tree. The garden already had 2 Tepe mesquite trees from the bean family, which do not provide food but help maintain nutrient-rich soils. In the understory, we have planted cacao. We have papayas and tree spinach in the shrub layer, Mexican pepper leaf and Mexican tea in the herbaceous layer, Mexican turnip and curcuma in the rhizosphere layer, and passion fruit and vanilla in the vertical layer. Although we have some patches with sour-grass clover, we have been less successful with the ground cover layer so far. One of the most satisfying experiences from our gardening has been composting. Maybe this sounds a bit weird to some of you, but there's something quite magical to harvesting the compost from what was food waste just a couple of months earlier. The compost attracts many insects working to decompose the food waste, which in our garden in turn attracted a pair of pygmy spotted skunks that used our compost as refuge. After clearing our garden from a common type of high grass, we decided to leave part of our garden uncultivated, because we were curious to see what types of plants would recolonize it. The first year we did this, the uncultivated land soon became completely covered with what resembled a cucumber. Unfortunately, it turned out that this was not the familiar edible cucumber, but a non-edible cousin from Eurasia, the squirting cucumber. The Tilburg University and the Dutch newspaper NRC took this idea to study recolonization of uncultivated gardens to a bigger scale with a recent citizen science project that encouraged 8,000 people to share data on keeping a meter squared in their garden wild for a year. After clearing the squirting cucumbers, which by the way are annoyingly sticky, our second try at this experiment was more satisfying. This time it gave a greater plant variety and included the local cat's claw ice plant, which is quite popular with hummingbirds. High-quality nature education and attractive urban green spaces may be the most direct leverage points to address the extinction of experience feedback loop. Louise Schala, her review of the literature on children's nature connection shows that nature education, when combined with a few hours in nature, can already lead to a stronger self-reported connectedness. The review also suggests that nature connectedness, while young, can be seen as a stock that needs to be replenished to remain connection, and that there are mental health benefits to doing so.